When we think of war, certain images come to mind scenes of chaos, bravery, and the relentless noise of battle. Stalingrad, though, is something else entirely. This city, now known as Volgograd, was the center of one of the most brutal and significant battles of World War II. Imagine the scene a city on the Volga River, desperately trying to hold on against a powerful enemy.
Exactly. And what's even more fascinating is how this city, with a name that changed from Stalingrad to Volgograd, shifted the entire course of the war. It makes you wonder, right? How could one battle have such a huge impact? What was it about Stalingrad that turned the tide? This is what we'll explore today, starting from its strategic importance to the intense battles that unfolded.
Let's dive into how the war between Germany and the Soviet Union began. Before the fighting started, in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union had a deal. They promised not to attack each other. This was called a non-aggression pact. But in 1941, Hitler, the German leader, broke this promise. He decided to invade the Soviet Union. This surprise attack was known as Operation Barbarossa.
Yes, at first, things went well for Germany. Their army was strong and moving fast. The Soviet Union was not ready for this. The German forces advanced quickly, winning many battles. Things seemed to go smoothly for Germany. However, there was a big problem. Their supply lines, which brought food and equipment, stretched too far. This started to slow down the German army.
As the Germans got closer to Moscow, they came within just 24 kilometers of the city. To their surprise, the brutal Russian winter started to kick in. This harsh weather helped the Soviets. It slowed down the German troops and caused many problems for them. This unexpected winter left the Germans struggling. They failed to capture Moscow, which was a close call.
Exactly. Then came another turning point. Instead of pushing harder at Moscow, Hitler decided to change targets. He set his eyes on Stalingrad, which was located on the Volga River. This city was very important. It was strategic for its industry and location. Controlling it would mean cutting off important supplies to the Soviet Union. This decision would change the course of the war.
Now let's talk about how important Stalingrad was. Picture a big industrial city on the Volga River. This river is like a highway for ships, moving goods across the region. If Germany could control Stalingrad, they would control this key waterway. It would be like holding a power switch that could cut off supplies to the Soviet Union. Stalingrad was vital because it offered Germany a chance to squeeze the Soviets economically.
Yes, and that's exactly why Hitler really wanted to capture it. He also had his eyes set on the Soviet oil fields. If they could get those too, it would have been a huge win for Germany. They had more soldiers, tanks, and planes, giving them a big advantage. Plus, there was the name Stalingrad. What a target for Hitler. Taking the city named after Stalin was important to him. It represented a huge symbolic victory.
But even with all those plans, things didn't go smoothly at first. The German attack was set to happen earlier, but delays got in the way. It made the German troops arrive at Stalingrad's outskirts only by August. This wait allowed the Soviets to get a bit more prepared than they were before. Stalingrad would soon see a battle like no other, leaving the city bracing for the storm.
Absolutely. And that made Stalingrad even more crucial. It was not just any city, it was like the heart of the Soviet supply system. Stalingrad had to be defended at all costs. So, when the battle began, the Soviets knew they couldn't let it fall. The city itself was essential for its supply lines and for keeping the connection going across the region.
All right, so after the German army planned their attack, they launched a massive bombing campaign over Stalingrad. The Luftwaffe, which was the German Air Force, began dropping bombs that turned large parts of the city to rubble. It was a horrific sight. The Soviet Air Force tried to fight back, but they were having a hard time. The Germans had control of the skies, which was really bad for the Soviets.
Yes, and in these tough times, the city's civilians played a role in resisting, even though it was very risky. Stalin made difficult decisions, like keeping civilians in the city. It was dangerous, but he thought it might help in defending Stalingrad. Women, in particular, were very active in the defense. They helped to man anti-aircraft guns and took part in many ways. Their bravery was nothing short of inspiring.
Speaking of defense, the Soviets used all they had. They even turned guns meant for aircraft to use against German tanks. One amazing story is about anti-aircraft defenses, mostly controlled by volunteers, many of whom were young women. Despite their lack of experience, these defenders held out and made a real impact. And with the need to boost their numbers, the Soviets brought in young conscripts to join the fight.
Exactly. Stalin issued Order 227, which was known for the phrase, "not a step back." This order meant retreat was not an option. Anyone trying to flee could face dire consequences. They formed penal battalions with those who broke the rules. These groups were sent to the most dangerous parts of the front line. It was an intense and harsh measure, but it did keep many in the fight.
All right, let's talk about the close quarters fighting in Stalingrad. Imagine it, soldiers moving from one building to another, almost like shadows. The fighting was intense, with each house becoming its own battlefield. The Soviets used a tactic called hugging the Germans. They stayed so close to the German lines that it was hard for the Germans to use heavy fire. It was a smart move, but it made the combat even more personal and chaotic.
Yes, and in this chaotic environment, the Germans started calling it a rat war. It was like fighting in a maze with soldiers hiding and waiting at every corner. This kind of warfare was very stressful for both sides. Places like train stations changed hands many times, with one side gaining a little ground, only to lose it the next day. Each inch of the city was fought over fiercely, and progress was painfully slow.
Speaking of heroic resistance, we should mention Pavlov's house. This was a building where a group of Soviet soldiers held out against the Germans for weeks. They turned it into a fortress, and even with few supplies, they managed to keep the enemy at bay. Pavlov's house became a symbol of Soviet strength and determination. The soldiers there created many problems for the Germans, showing how strong and brave the Soviets could be under pressure.
And then there were the snipers, like Vasily Zaitsev, who played a huge role in the defense of Stalingrad. Zaitsev became a legend with his skill, taking out many German soldiers. Sniping added a psychological element to the battle. The snipers were like ghosts in the city, unseen but always present. This made the Germans very cautious and added a layer of fear and uncertainty to their movements.
The moment was critical. The German advance had reached its peak, pressing deep into Soviet areas. However, it was clear that the battle for Stalingrad was about to change. The Soviet soldiers were besieged, handling immense pressure, but they held firm. Their goal was not just to defend, they were about to launch a counteroffensive. This was a pivotal moment in the battle, one that would shift everything.
That's right. The plan for the Soviet counteroffensive was called Operation Uranus. It was bold and aimed to quickly surround the German forces. The Germans didn't expect such a strong move from the Soviets, who were thought to be on the back foot. The Soviets took the Germans by surprise, targeting their weaker flanks. This strategy of attacking from the sides was key to turning the tide in their favor.
The Soviet attack was powerful. Their pincer movement was a success, which cut off the German Sixth Army. Suddenly, the Germans found themselves isolated, surrounded by Soviet forces. The attackers had turned into defenders, and their situation was dire. This was the turning point, as the once mighty German army was now trapped. The Soviet pressure began to show its effects, and their victory was looking more possible.
Indeed, the encirclement of the German forces marked a significant change in the momentum of the battle. The Germans had previously held so much ground, but now they faced immense difficulties. The Soviet encirclement strategy was effective and changed the outlook of the whole war. It gave the Soviet Union a sense of power and initiative they hadn't had before this decisive move.
The situation for the German Sixth Army became dire as the winter set in. Promises made by the Luftwaffe to provide supplies were not kept. The Luftwaffe tried to drop supplies to the encircled army, but it wasn't enough. They needed about 750 tons of provisions each day, but sometimes only a small fraction arrived. Without enough food or ammunition, the German soldiers began to face serious problems.
It's true. Inside the German pocket, conditions grew terrible. Soldiers suffered from cold and hunger. Soviet forces kept advancing, slowly pushing back the Germans. The Soviet strategy was working, but Hitler refused to let the German Sixth Army surrender. His decision made things worse for the trapped troops. They needed to break out of the encirclement, but without official approval, their options were limited.
The final days were tough for the German army at Stalingrad. They were losing men, and supplies nearly ran out. Many Germans tried to fight on, but it was clear that their situation was hopeless. This surrender had a big impact on the leadership, showing poor planning and decisions. It was a disastrous end for the German army, and it left a lasting mark on their history.
Yes, the emotional stress on both sides was huge. For the Germans, losing so many soldiers was devastating. For the Soviets, victory came at a high cost. The number of lives lost on both sides was immense. This battle changed the course of the war by weakening the German forces significantly. The defeat at Stalingrad had lasting historical implications. It marked a shift in power during World War II.
As we wrap up this journey through the Battle of Stalingrad, it's clear how much it changed the course of World War II. Stalingrad showed the strength and courage of both the civilians and soldiers who fought there. The city's resistance stopped the German advance and became a turning point in the war. Today, memorials like The Motherland Calls remind us of these sacrifices and the fight that took place. It is a story of bravery and a struggle that shaped history.
Reflecting on Stalingrad, we see the immense sacrifices made by many. It teaches us about strength, unity, and the high cost of war. As we end this episode, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this powerful story. Please like and comment on this podcast to share your insights. If you enjoyed our discussion, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes on important historical events. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you in the next one.